That segment that takes a look at matters affecting us as humans, as Kenyan citizens, and how we are working towards ensuring that we are more enlightened, or more like today, we're going to look at how we can make it more accessible for our sisters and brothers who are living with disabilities. But funny enough, our buildings are not quite there when it comes to making them accessible to these sisters and brothers who are in our society. Now, joining me for that discussion is, on my immediate left, is Hamu Songa, an architect and official of the Architectural Association of Kenya. Welcome to the show. And of course, we are having a legislator in the house who's going to tell us more about her experience on living with a disability, and as well as why we do not have this happening, because the Constitution provides for that, but we're not having that. And that is Doctor from the 10th, this is, I'll allow you to introduce yourself. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Honorable Denita Gati.
Denita Gati.
Yes, I am a member of parliament in the National Assembly.
Yeah, so your name escaped me and I didn't want to say the wrong thing. So that's, I didn't want to introduce you as a doctor from a particular hospital, because we're supposed to have 3 guests and I didn't want to make that mistake. But welcome, and your views are really, really welcome on this particular topic. And as somebody who has experienced this, and as well as a member of parliament, tell us, how does the Constitution give people living with disabilities rights to accessibility? What platforms has it given us, and are we there yet in terms of making sure people living with disabilities are accepted or integrated into our society and live just like us, who are not having some of these problems?
Yeah, thank you very much once again, and I really want to say that basically issues to do with accessibility are issues that are issues of concern worldwide. It's not only in Kenya. And by the way, the Kenya government, Kenya as a country, as you are aware, actually has signed the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the UNCRPD, in 2007. And then even in 2008, our country went ahead and ratified the UN Convention. To ratify means that the country decided and agreed, basically, that it is going to really make sure that that persons with disabilities are really, mainstreamed, and they're really considered in all aspects of life. So that means that, first of all, internationally, Kenya is a signatory to the UNCRPD, to ensuring that people with disabilities, accessibility, people with disabilities, all this, life that goes on in life, persons with disabilities are there to make sure that the country has put persons with disabilities priority. If you look at, for example, Article 9 of the UNCRPD actually basically obligates countries and states that have ratified the UNCRPD to making sure that accessibility for persons with disabilities is guaranteed. I mean, that is huge. It is not just it's a matter of something on paper. And then when you come back to this country, you realize that issues to do with our Constitution under Chapter 4, the Bill of Rights, basically looks at persons with disabilities so extensively to making sure that the lives of persons with disabilities is a life of dignity. You understand? And that dignity means that even things to do with accessibility are things that are guaranteed. But when you now come back to the implementation,
that is where
the problem is. Implementation of issues to do with persons with disabilities has always remained a challenge. The Ministry of Labor in this country, as you are aware, is the ministry that basically kind of looks at issues, a lot of issues to do with persons with disabilities. We as a country have a Persons with Disabilities Act of 2003. And the Persons with Disabilities Act is basically a wider kind of tool that basically, was brought up to actually set the National Council for Persons with Disabilities. So that is a body, and through that act is what we are saying. How then do we look at issues disability as a normal, thing,
as part and parcel of our lives,
our daily lives. But what has been a problem, I'm telling you, has been the implementation.
Because we as Kenyans, a considerable part of our population is people living with disabilities. But at the same time, this is not showing in terms of how we are living our lives. So one would wonder, is it a question of representation? But with you as an honorable member of parliament, then it's not a question of representation. So where is the disconnect between you forwarding the needs in parliament and then it coming out in reality? What is the disconnect?
I think there has really not been a very, very big goodwill in the past to really focus on disability issues. As you're aware, I mean, people with disability, our attitude as a country, as a people, has always put persons with disability as afterthoughts.
The back burner,
You know, they are always, you know, those people, where are they? That's how it has always been. As you are aware, I got into the disability sector myself like 5 years ago. And as a person who has been living a life without a disability and a life with a disability, I can be sure to tell you that there's a very big disconnect for persons with disability. They are always thought as second thoughts. Oh, when we are designing things in this country, because of our culture, we do not even imagine that we have people with disabilities amongst our population who needs to be considered from the word go. So that now when it reaches a point where you have finished, you know, building your big building or making your road, you now think, oh, we forgot those people. By the way, where are they? Where did we leave them? So as a people, and that has been the stigma that has always been there. We have not understood and accepted the fact that we have persons with disabilities who live within our settlements, our environments. So we completely have been leaving them behind. We have been forgetting, and that is why we see with the new constitution and with so many of us as members of parliament, we are able now to see what has been happening. It has always been a part of life. We forget if you do not live a disability life, if you're not disabled, or you do not have a relative or a wife or a girlfriend or a husband who has a disability, you will not bother. And that is the thing, I can tell you. And that's why persons have been left behind. So we have come in to kind of bridge that gap and look at the laws. What does the Constitution of Kenya say under Chapter 4? Bill of Rights extensively talks about the enhancement of the welfare for persons with disabilities in this country. But you realize that the laws are there. We are getting into agenda. You have heard now the government has Agenda 4. Agenda 4 is big. It is huge. It is so rich in terms of enriching the lives of Kenyans in this country. But where are persons with disabilities mainstreamed in Agenda 4? That is still lacking. And that is what you see. We are beginning to identify where are the problems. I just came from Kisumu, where we had the legislative summit of the Senate and the county assemblies. And the issues disability are issues that are yet to be, because persons with disabilities belong to counties. They belong to constituencies, they belong to wards, and they belong to villages. But now, even the planning itself within their counties and their constituencies, they're still not there. So for me, it is an issue of mentality. We as a people need to change our mentality. We need to accept that we have people that have various diversities. And for your information, in Parliament, I have been advocating for disability to be considered as a diversity. It is a diversity. Disability should be a diversity. Just like we have the religious diversities, you know, we have, you know, these days we even have other diversities we don't want to talk about because of our, but you see, those are diversities that are in this country. And yet disability, which is something that has been there, is there. We do not see disability as a diversity. It is high time we consider disability a diversity and programmed for disability seriously. Now I want to include architect in the conversation. Hamwe Songa, tell us, when it comes to even those who decide to make their buildings inclusive or accessible to people living with disabilities, you would find that even the ramps, when you think about it literally, you would find it difficult to imagine how someone on a wheelchair would make it up such a steep ramp. And I think it's not even considered. It's just maybe they're doing it for the sake of doing it. It might be too steep. It's like an afterthought. They said, oh well, let's just do this. But then why is it so difficult for us to make our buildings accessible for our sisters and brothers who are part of our lives?
I think, thank you very much. I think the first, it is good that we're having this conversation. It's timely. The government is just implementing, affordable housing. So the conversation is very timely because we need to plug into such initiatives. Over time, in my view, the building industry operates using a code.
Okay.
All right. It's what we call the building code. All right. This code that we're using, we inherited from it's post-colonial. It was from 1968.
Yes.
That is a code that is in use up to now. We've tried to amend it. It's still in process. And you can imagine a post-colonial document being used up to now. It creates certain gaps, it creates certain challenges, because the world has moved on, materials are different, standards have become different. We've come to new realities,
yes,
which we didn't foresee at that particular time. But the beginning for me, the beginning of all this conversation should be that, yes, we have a constitution,
yes,
which guarantees everyone equal rights, including persons with disabilities. We have the Disability Act, which spells out exactly what needs to be done in terms of compliance. I think the Disability Act even gives the council some teeth in terms of what to do.
Yes, holding people accountable
to
yes,
buildings
yes,
that are not compliant.
But where does the law come in? Because is there a law that makes people know that if I don't do this, I'm going to face certain repercussions? Because when it comes to certain issues that we talk about day in, day out, to have all these programs, all these campaigns, but at the end of the day, the reality on the ground is not reflecting what we keep on talking about in these campaigns and in these initiatives. So perhaps there needs to be a law that makes people afraid to not be compliant. Yeah?
Correct,
yeah,
correct. And you're very right, because the law as it exists at the moment,
yes,
it extensively mentions public buildings.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
If you read most of what is on the law, it says public buildings. There must be, unrestricted access to persons with disability.
Yes.
All right. The moment it's made to feel as if only public buildings should comply.
It should be everywhere,
you have,
right?
And the biggest developers nowadays are private. So when they look at compliance, they look at compliance in terms of giving a ramp
yeah,
at the main entrance,
yes,
so that you can just get into the ground floor actually.
And what if the person wants to get to the basement?
Yes.
What do you do? Yeah, exactly.
What if the person wants to get to the basement? There are various forms of the world has changed,
yeah,
so there are various ways in which compliance can be achieved. You don't have necessarily, because our law as it sits,
yes,
I don't need to put a lift on my building
yeah,
if it's not more than 5 floors.
That is it. But then a person with disabilities,
Yes,
any kind, whether they're using a wheelchair or crutches, even one flight of stairs
correct,
is an issue.
Correct. So I think my take will be, we need to start exploring other ways, because either we change the law so that it compels persons to, developers to install some of these gadgets. We have stair lifts, we have wheelchair lifts. People don't know about them,
yes,
because they installed is like a railing.
Yeah.
You install it next to the rail. A person who is and when you talk about disability,
yes,
I don't know why we are restricting it to mobility.
Yes, mobility.
But there are various forms of disability, from persons with short stature,
yeah,
blind,
and
the
also
deaf.
I would imagine if this person was in a lift and was blind and they needed to press a certain button, they would need some audio to tell them so that they can speak back, and the mechanism can know where to take them. So yeah, I feel like Mheshimiwa Gati, you have something to say about this. Yeah,
I really want to agree with him, because I think it's high time that now we even put very strict penalties.
Yeah,
we have to move beyond just putting it on paper and saying public buildings, whoever wants to come up with the public. So what next if that person, that individual, that rich man,
yes,
who puts up a very huge building does not really comply?
Yes.
We need to actually even give the council or whichever body the mandate to prosecute. Prosecute. Go ahead and prosecute, because the persons with disabilities work majorly through the National Council. And under the Ministry of Labor,
yes,
and so the council has its own limits. They're saying the law says, if you are constructing a building that has over 5 what is it called?
Floors.
Yeah, floors. That is when a lift is. Yes. How on earth do you expect a person with disability to even make it to second floor using a wheelchair? Or even, let me tell you, disability access is not just about physical, as you say. It's not about physical disability. It's not about the wheelchair or the cane. It is about So many other factors. What about the blind?
Yes.
What about the? What about the dumb and the deaf, and all these categories of disability have to be considered. Exactly. So that we are even talking about. Why are we even talking about housing, affordable housing in Agenda 4, when we have not even put laws to ensure that people with disabilities are considered even within the housing units? Yes. How will people with disabilities get houses? What criteria and what quota has the ministry put in place to allocate housing units to people with disabilities? And even it's not just about housing units allocation, it's about accessibility to those houses. Yes. Most of these buildings that we have in this country, in Kenya, you will realize that the only thing they have is a ramp. Is a temporary ramp. It's not even a permanent ramp. Yeah. Look at what you have here. I think we also need to start with you. This ramp, these are not correct.
It's too steep.
Yeah. They're steep, and then they just. You can see you not really put in a serious thought to put in permanent ramps. Yeah. These are ramps to just remove and put away when a disabled person does not come. You remove it. Put something.
But at least
permanent.
we have tried.
You have tried, yes. Yeah. But you need to. Maybe because we don't host a lot of disabled people here. But I am now talking about how do we make sure that every facility in this country has a ramp, first of all,
this is true.
For people with disability using wheelchair. It also has to have the talking, what do we call them? The audio. If, for example, you are in a lift or an elevator, and you have to put a lift so that a person who does not hear or see can be able to actually come in and be able to press and go where they are going. Those are the small little
And what about
basics.
personnel? Because I feel sometimes the personnel, let's say you're trying to get to a building that has no ramps, as we say, or whatever gadgets need, or this is a deaf person trying to get to 11th floor, or there's a blind person. Are the personnel, in your experience, been trained to actually cater? Do they feel like this is not my job, then somebody else needs, how does it work?
The mentality is still not there, and I think that is where we have gone wrong as a country and as a people. That stigma still, we do not have people who are willing to help.
Yes.
In this country, when you see a disabled person, you will go on with your business. You go on with your business. You leave that person there to struggle in the lift, in the elevator, in the train, or wherever they are.
Yes.
And so we have to change. We have to build the awareness and the capacity of our people to be able to help. Just a mere helping of a disabled person to access.
To feel that it's part of their duty.
The Ministry of Transport, the government has brought in. You're seeing now, we have the BRT, the Bus Rapid Transit.
Yes.
That is a huge project of the government.
Yes.
And when we are talking about accessibility, and then we have a whole Ministry of Transport bringing in so many buses into this country, and those buses, the ministry cannot tell you how many buses have a provision for wheelchair or provision for disabled people. Yes. The ministry, and you remember what I did, because for us as disabled people, we are basically trying. We will have to petition. If, for example, the Ministry of Transport, within the 67 buses that the ministry is bringing to this country, huge amounts of money coming all the way from South Africa and from Spain. Those are countries that have done well in disability issues.
Yes.
They have ramps. They have hydraulic ramps where a disabled person can go with a wheelchair and a cane, and then it lifts you up, and it actually even takes you there, and sometimes it even has the buckles. You put. Life beautiful for people with disability. What is so difficult there? And yet you are importing such vehicles from South Africa. The Ministry of Transport has to be in the forefront. We cannot, as disabled people, 6.5 million Kenyans who live in this country, cannot wait for 67 buses coming into Kenya, and then you say, oh, those people were forgotten. Sasa let's wait for the other one. Now maybe the other one that comes we will consider. No, persons with disabilities have to be co-designers and co-planners in everything that affects them, including the transport system, including the housing we are talking about. Hii maneno tunaongea, and all the time we wait.
Now, speaking of that, we are talking about ramps and lifts and audio systems and all these things. Perhaps accessibility is a word too general. I would like Mr. Wasonga to tell us, what does it mean for a building to be accessible? Are we talking ramps? And what is the right kind of ramp? You've criticized our ramp. We have a ramp, but it's too steep, as you've said. But then what is needed? What are the measurements? And also, I want you to tell us, is it too expensive, or is this just a question of ignorance?
I think I'll start from the last part. I think it's a question of ignorance.
Okay.
I think the mentality of Kenyans need to change. it's an issue of breaking down these mental barriers that we've put upon ourselves. I don't think anyone has put these barriers. We've put them on ourselves.
Yes.
When you talk about accessibility, accessibility is just that, accessibility. You need to access all parts of that building.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why people go for ramps is because it's easier to do a ramp to the first floor of the building. But
and
my
it's
argument,
a ramp for the person to wheel themselves. It's not for them to be pushed. I assume.
Ramps have standards.
Yes.
That's why I keep referring to the building code, because that is what. Yes, some ramps are not up to code, and that brings us to the other part, which is the enforcement bit.
Yes.
That yes, we might have all these beautiful laws. We might translate the law into a code because the industry works the code. The code is technical. It specifies what you guys, if you call a step.
Yeah.
for a stairs, you call it a step, as you call it a riser.
A riser, okay.
There has, the research has been done, there's a comfort level beyond which you cannot go, all right? So that code specifies how high
it should be. That
step should be, so that even if your eyes are closed, you can comfortably go up or go down.
Yes.
It specifies even the way you step, which as we call it a tread.
A tread, okay.
So that whether your feet are too small or too big, you can fit. That is what the industry understands.
Yes.
So when we do all these things in terms of policy and the laws, we have to come back and now translate it into the technical language that the industry understands. Because it's interesting, Mheshimiwa has brought about the issue of the BRT, because when you translate now that into the technical language, me as a technical person will actually start to understand that when I do a curb, which is the edge of the road, literally the curb needs to be this high. When this bus comes, it needs to have this certain clearance so that it's flush. All right. Now that is what the industry understands. That's why when we start this conversation, we have to take it all the way to the code, because the councils, which are the approving authorities, they use this code to stamp
everything.
The drawings.
So if this
so if the code is wrong, or if the code does not expressly specify certain components, then you still get your buildings approved.
Then those are the codes that we need to revise.
Yes,
we need to revise those codes. And accessibility, let me just tell you quickly that accessibility is not about physical. It's not just about physical.
Yes.
That's what we are saying. Accessibility is about also access to information.
Yes.
How do the blind, for example, access information? Is accessibility to information.
Yes.
The brailles, the sound itself inside a building or inside a bus. Accessibility is wide.
It's a wide subject. And given that it's a wide subject, we cannot finish all of that.
And these ministries need to engage persons with disabilities.
Yes, and have representatives and people in the community coming up to tell them what they need for this. And that wraps up our discussion on accessibility to building. I mean, it's a question of codes and systems, and not just the buildings itself, and putting in places to make sure that people are accountable for not making their buildings accessible. Now I'll hand it over to you, Michael. Thank you very much, Mheshimiwa Gathi and Mr. Wesonga, for joining me on this very, very informative discussion. Back to you, Michael, to give us more on the Twitter poll and what the people online are saying about data safety.
All right, thank you very much, Trix, and very good discussion there on accessibility and disability is not inability, and therefore